The massive holographic chamber stretched out like a crystal cathedral, its walls shimmering with alien technology that humans still barely understood. Ambassador Minji stood alone at the center, surrounded by thousands of alien delegates from across the galaxy. The air hummed with translation devices working overtime, converting the clicks, growls, and electronic pulses of hundreds of different species into something resembling coherent speech. She had been standing there for 3 hours now, listening to delegate after delegate explain why humanity didn't belong in civilized space. The reasons were as varied as they were insulting. Kelvari claimed humans were too aggressive. The Thessian Empire said humans bred too quickly. The machine intelligence known as the Collective argued that humans were inefficient and wasteful. Minji had heard it all before, but never quite like this. Never with such unanimous hatred. The voting crystals floating above each delegation pulsed with light as the final tallies came in. Each pulse felt like a nail in humanity's coffin. 847 civilizations had voted to kick them out. Only 12 had voted to let them stay, and 3 couldn't be bothered to care either way. Out of nearly 900 galactic civilizations, humanity had found fewer friends than fingers on both hands. The ethereal prime floated at the center of the chamber, its translucent form rippling like water made of starlight. When it spoke, its voice echoed from every surface, impossible to ignore or tune out. The species known as humanity is hereby stripped of all Galactic Council privileges and protections. Your homeworld, which you call Earth, all human settlements throughout Council space are now considered banished territory. You have exactly 72 standard galactic cycles to remove all human presence from civilized space. Minji felt her heart sink, but she kept her face perfectly calm. Years of diplomatic training had taught her never to show weakness, especially not now. Still, she had to ask the question, even though she suspected she already knew the answer. Honored delegates, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustics. Before we accept this judgment, I must ask what specific crime humanity has committed to deserve such punishment. The silence that followed was somehow worse than the earlier jeering. Then the Korthok representative, a creature that looked like a cross between a praying mantis and a suit of armor, clicked its razor-sharp mandibles together in what Minji had learned was their version of laughter. Crime, the creature said, its voice like grinding metal. You misunderstand the situation entirely, primitive creature. This is not about crime. This is about pest control. The chamber exploded with what could only be described as laughter, though it sounded nothing like human amusement. There were chittering sounds from the insect-like species, harmonic vibrations from the crystal beings, electronic static from the artificial intelligences, and dozens of other sounds that Minji's translator could barely process. But the meaning was clear. Enough. They were laughing at her. At all of humanity, Minji stood perfectly still, letting the wave of mockery wash over her. Inside, her mind was racing, cataloging every insult, every gesture of contempt, every species that seemed to take particular pleasure in humanity's downfall. She had always been good at remembering faces, and alien faces were no exception. They shouldn't delegate. A tall, graceful being with silver skin and too many joints raised one of its forearms. Perhaps we should explain it in terms even a human can understand, it said, its voice dripping with condescension. You see, when a species becomes too troublesome, too disruptive to the natural order, the civilized response is removal. Of it as weeding a garden. More laughter rippled through the chamber. Minji noticed that not every species was laughing, though. Few delegates sat in stony silence, their expressions unreadable. She filed that information away for later. Even a handful of allies might matter in the dark days ahead. The ethereal prime raised what might have been a hand, and the chamber fell silent again. The decision is final and irreversible. Human ambassador, you will return to your people and inform them of this judgment. Any attempt to resist or remain in council space beyond the deadline will be met with the full military force of the Galactic Council. Minji bowed slightly, a gesture that cost her more than anyone in the chamber could possibly know. I understand, honored Prime. humanity will comply with the Council's decision. But as she spoke those words of surrender, her mind was already working on something else entirely. They wanted to treat humans like pests. Fine. But these aliens had clearly never dealt with the kind of pests that Earth had produced. Had no idea what humans were capable of when their backs were against the wall. As she turned to leave the chamber, Angie allowed herself one small private smile. These aliens thought they were so clever, so superior. They had just made the biggest mistake in galactic history. They didn't even know it yet. The walk back to her ship felt like the longest journey of her life. 6 months had passed since. The Council delivered their verdict, and the massive evacuation was finally complete. Captain Jinwoo stood on the bridge of the New Seoul, humanity's final transport ship leaving Council territory. Behind them stretched a convoy of thousands of vessels, everything from military cruisers to civilian freighters packed with families and their belongings. This was it, the end of humanity's brief time among the galactic community. The bridge was quieter than usual. His crew moved with mechanical precision, but Jinwoo could feel the weight of defeat hanging over everyone. They were leaving behind everything they had built over the past 50 years since first contact: space stations, colonies, trade agreements, friendships with alien species. All of it was being abandoned because the Council had decided humans were unwanted pests through the main view screen. Jinwoo watched the invisible barrier that marked the edge of Council space growing closer. On the other side of that line lay the Outer Rim, a vast region of unexplored systems and failed colonies that civilized space had written off as worthless. That was where humanity would have to make its new home, assuming they could survive. Long enough to build one? The sensor array painted a grim picture around them. Dozens of Council enforcement ships maintained formation alongside the human convoy, their weapons powered and ready. They weren't taking any chances. Every human movement was being watched, recorded, and analyzed. The message was clear: leave now and never come back. Lieutenant Park. His communications officer suddenly straightened at her console. Captain, we're receiving an incoming transmission from the ethereal command vessel. Jinwoo sighed. He had been expecting this. The ethereals always like to have the last word. Put it through. The main screen flickered, and the familiar translucent form of an ethereal commander appeared. Its body seemed to be made of liquid starlight, constantly shifting and flowing in patterns that hurt to look at directly. When it spoke, its voice seemed to come from everywhere at once, a side effect of their strange biology. Human vessel designated New Soul, the being said, its tone carrying the same condescending politeness that had become so familiar during the evacuation. This is your final departure from civilized space. We trust you understand the terms of your exile. Any attempt to return to Council territory will result in the immediate destruction of all human vessels and installations. Jinwoo stepped forward, his hands clasped behind his back in a pose that had become second nature during his years in command. He had dealt with pirates, smugglers, and hostile aliens throughout his career. But something about the ethereals always made his skin crawl. Maybe it was their assumption that they were naturally superior to everyone else. We understand perfectly, Jinwoo replied, his voice level and professional. Humanity will honor the terms of exile. The ethereal seemed to pause, as if surprised by the lack of protest or pleading. Good. Consider this final warning an act of mercy on our part. The Council could have simply destroyed your species entirely. That was when Jinwoo's expression changed. The diplomatic mask he had been wearing for months finally slipped, replaced by something that had made seasoned pirates think twice about crossing him. It was a smile, but there was nothing friendly about it. It was the kind of smile a shark might wear if sharks could smile. Mercy, Jinwoo said, taking a step closer to the screen. That's actually pretty cute coming from you. He leaned forward, slightly, his eyes never leaving the alien commander. You want to deliver a message to your precious Council? Here it is. You people just made the biggest tactical mistake in galactic history. The ethereal's form rippled, which Jinwoo had learned was a sign of confusion or surprise. You dare threaten the Council? Threaten? Jinwoo's smile widened. I'm not threatening anyone. Yeah. I'm making a promise. We'll be back. And when we return, We won't be asking for your permission anymore. Won't be begging for scraps from your table or trying to prove we deserve a place in your little club." He straightened up, his voice growing stronger with each word. "You see, you made one fundamental error in your calculations. You assumed that being kicked out of your council was the worst thing that could happen to us. But you just gave us something much more valuable than membership in your bureaucratic nightmare. You gave us freedom." The transmission flickered, and Jinwoo could tell the ethereal was struggling to process what it was hearing. These beings were used to broken spirits and desperate pleas for mercy. They weren't prepared for defiance. "Mark my words," Jinwoo continued. "The next time you see human ships in council space, we won't be refugees or supplicants. We'll be equals. And if you don't like that idea, well, that's going to be your problem, not ours." The ethereal's form pulsed with what might have been anger. "Impossible. The Outer Rim is a wasteland. Your species will be extinct within a generation."
"Oh, maybe,"
Jinwoo admitted with a shrug. "Or maybe you just gave the most stubborn, adaptable, and vengeful species in the galaxy exactly the motivation it needed to become something you'll wish you'd never crossed." Without waiting for a response, he nodded to Lieutenant Park. Transmission. The screen went dark, leaving the bridge in relative silence. Jinwoo turned to his navigation officer, a young woman named Lieutenant Kim, who had volunteered to serve on the last ship out rather than accept a safer assignment on one of the earlier transports. "Lieutenant Kim, how long until we reach the Outer Rim territories? Approximately 3 standard days at current speed, sir." Jinwoo nodded, his mind already working on the challenges ahead. 3 days would give them time to prepare for what came next. The Outer Rim wasn't empty. It was full of other species that the Council had deemed unworthy of membership. Pirates, rebels, failed colonies, and worse. Most human planners saw that as a threat. Jinwoo saw it as an opportunity. Said, settling into his command chair. "That gives us just enough time to prepare our presentation for our new neighbors. We're going to explain to every exile rebel, an outcast in the Rim, why joining humanity's new empire is the smartest decision they'll ever make." Dr. Soyoung had always been told she was too smart for her own good. Standing in the makeshift assembly hall of Haven's Rest Colony, surrounded by the galaxy's most wanted outcasts, she was about to prove that theory either brilliantly right or catastrophically wrong. The colony itself was a testament to desperation and ingenuity. Built inside a hollowed-out asteroid in the middle of nowhere, it had become home to every species the Galactic Council had rejected over the past century. The walls were patched metal sheets held together with hope and stubbornness. The air. Recyclers wheezed constantly, and the artificial gravity flickered just enough to remind everyone. They were living on borrowed time, but none of that mattered right now. What mattered was the crowd of aliens packed into every available space. Hanging from the rafters and pressed against the walls, Soyoung had never seen so many different species in one place. There were the Zeltharians, with their distinctive battle scars and razor-sharp claws. A group of rogue, artificial intelligences had manifested themselves through mobile platforms that looked like walking computer towers. Former Therian merchants, their trading licenses revoked for crimes like excessive profit margins and unauthorized entrepreneurship, whispered among themselves in the back. There were refugees from the Kelvari border wars, political dissidents from the Ethesian Empire, and even a few humans who had refused to leave council space during the official evacuation. They were united by one thing: the Council had decided they didn't deserve to exist in civilized space. Soyoung stepped onto the improvised stage, which was really just a stack of shipping containers welded together. The crowd gradually fell. Silent, hundreds of eyes and optical sensors turning toward her. She had given lectures at the most prestigious universities in human space, but she had never felt pressure quite like this. "Friends," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the colony's primitive sound system. "I know most of you don't know me. No. I'm Dr. Soyoung, formerly of the Earth Strategic Planning Institute. 3 months ago, I was designing economic models for peaceful coexistence with the Galactic Council." A few bitter laughs echoed through the crowd. Everyone here knew how well that had worked out. The Council believes they've solved a problem by gathering us all here in the middle of nowhere, Young continued. They think they've eliminated the troublemakers, the rebels, the ones who wouldn't fit into their perfect galactic order. She paused, letting her eyes sweep across the crowd. What they've actually done is give us the greatest gift imaginable, complete freedom from their rules, their taxes, their bureaucracy, and their control. A scarred Zeltharian warrior near the front of the crowd stepped forward. His species were known for their directness, and this one looked like he had been through more battles than most. Half his face was covered in ritual scars, and his left arm had been replaced with a mechanical prosthetic that gleamed under the harsh lights. "Human," he said, his voice a low growl that the translation system struggled to process. "You speak of freedom, but the Council's enforcement fleets patrol the borders of this region. We cannot leave. We cannot trade with civilized worlds. We are trapped in this wasteland, surviving on scraps." Young's expression shifted into something that had made her colleagues nervous back. When she was still designing theoretical economic warfare scenarios, it was a grin, but there was nothing friendly about it. It was the expression of someone who had just figured out how to win a game that everyone else thought was rigged. "Are we trapped?" she asked, her voice carrying a hint of excitement that made several aliens lean forward. "Tell me, what does every galactic power need to maintain control over their territory?" Silence stretched for several seconds. Then a synthetic voice from the AI collective spoke up, its mechanical tones somehow managing to convey curiosity. "Economic stability." "Exactly right," Young said, pointing toward the cluster of mobile platforms. "And what does economic stability require? What's the foundation that every galactic civilization is built on?" This time the answer came from a different direction. A Therian merchant who had been quietly calculating something on a handheld device looked up with sudden understanding. "Trade routes," he whispered, but in the silence of the hall, everyone heard him clearly. Young nodded enthusiastically. "Trade routes. The lifelines that connect every world in Council space. The invisible highways that carry everything from raw materials to finished goods to information." She gestured toward the rough star charts that someone had projected on the wall behind her. "Now, let's look at our current position. Council controls the core worlds. Yes. Those are the rich, established systems where all the major civilizations have their capitals and primary colonies." The crowd was completely silent now, every being focused on her words. "But we," Young continued, her voice growing stronger, "we control something much more valuable. Control the space between them. Look at these charts. Every major trade route from the core worlds to the outer colonies passes directly through what the Council now calls the Exile Zone." The murmuring started quietly, but it grew as the implications sank in. Aliens began pulling out their own devices, checking star charts and trade data. The Therian merchants were practically vibrating with excitement as they confirmed what Young was saying. "Every resource shipment from the mining colonies," Young said, counting off on her fingers. "Every diplomatic courier carrying sensitive communications. Every military supply convoy heading to frontier outposts. Every luxury transport carrying Council officials to their vacation worlds." The scarred Zeltharian warrior's damaged face split into what could only be described as a predatory grin. "You propose piracy?" he said, and there was approval in his voice. Young shook her head. "I propose something much more civilized than piracy. I propose taxation." The crowd erupted into discussion. Some aliens looked confused, others excited, and a few appeared genuinely terrified at the audacity of what she was suggesting. "Think about it," Young said, raising her voice over the noise. "The Council wanted to treat us like we don't exist. Fine. Let's show them exactly what happens when the space between their precious worlds becomes ... uncooperative." She let that word hang in the air for a moment before continuing. "We're not talking about robbery or violence. We're talking about establishing legitimate government authority over unclaimed space, collecting reasonable fees for safe passage, providing security services that the Council clearly can't be bothered to offer." The AI Collective's spokesperson spoke up again. "You're suggesting we establish our own government entity to rival the Council itself." I'm suggesting we establish the only government that actually represents the beings living in this region, Young replied. The council abandoned us here. That makes this our territory now. And if they want to use our space for their trade routes, well, that's going to cost them. The silence that followed was different from before. This wasn't confusion or skepticism. This was the silence of predators realizing they had been handed the perfect hunting ground. The Zeltharian warrior was the first to speak. When do we start, Admiral? Minji stood on the bridge of the Retribution, her hands clasped behind her back as she watched the tactical display with the calm satisfaction of someone who had spent 3 years planning for exactly this moment. The massive holographic screen showed dozens of red dots representing Council warships scattered across the Kepler Junction, one of the most important trade crossings in the galaxy. All same ships that had once escorted humanity into exile were now trapped, outgunned, and completely outmaneuvered. 3 years. That's how long it had taken to transform a ragtag group of desperate refugees into what military analysts across the galaxy were now calling the most dangerous unified force in known space. The bridge around her hummed with quiet efficiency, her crew working with the kind of precision that only came from surviving impossible odds. Together, the transformation hadn't happened overnight. Those first months in the Outer Rim had been brutal. Half the human colonies had nearly starved before they figured out how to work with the strange alien ecosystems they found themselves in. Equipment broke down constantly without access to Council supply chains. People died from diseases that Council medicine could have cured easily. But humans, Minji had learned, were remarkably good at holding grudges. Every death, every hardship, every night spent wondering if they would survive until morning had been carefully cataloged and remembered. The Exile Coalition, as they had come to call themselves, had been forged in that crucible of suffering. The Council was learning what 3 years of desperation and genius could accomplish when properly motivated. Admiral called out Lieutenant Hyjin from the communications station. The ethereal flagship is requesting immediate parley. They're transmitting on all emergency frequencies. Minji didn't even turn around. Her eyes remained fixed on the tactical display, watching as her forces maintained perfect formation around the trapped Council fleet. Request denied, she said simply. They had 72 cycles to talk when they kicked us out. Today they listen. The battle had been over before it really began, though the Council officers probably hadn't realized it yet. Dr. So-Young's economic warfare campaign had been working for 2 years now, slowly strangling the Council's supply lines and forcing them to take increasingly desperate measures to keep their trade routes open. What had started as simple taxation of ships passing through exile, territory had evolved into something much more sophisticated, the Zeltharian shock. Troops had proven to be everything their reputation promised, and more. When they boarded a ship, resistance usually ended within minutes. The rogue artificial intelligences had cracked every encryption system the Council possessed, giving the Coalition perfect intelligence on ship movements, military deployments, and even private communications between Council leaders. But it was the humans who had provided the strategic vision that tied it all together. While other species focused on their individual strengths, humans had learned to see the bigger picture. They understood that this wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about proving a point that would echo across the galaxy for generations. The Council fleet had walked straight into a trap that had been 3 years in the making. They had come to the Kepler Junction, expecting to face the same desperate refugees they had expelled. Instead, they found themselves surrounded by a force that had learned to fight smarter, not just harder. Admiral came a different voice, this one carrying the distinctive electronic harmonics of the AI collective. I'm detecting something that requires your immediate attention. The Council ships are powering up their planet-killer weapons. Minji's blood turned to ice in her veins. Planet killers were weapons of absolute last resort, devices capable of cracking a world's crust and rendering it completely uninhabitable. The Council had sworn they were only for use against existential threats to galactic civilization. No one had used one in over 2 centuries. Targeting data? She asked, her voice carefully controlled even as her heart hammered against her ribs. Earthy AI responded without emotion. They appeared to be preparing to make an example of the human homeworld. The bridge fell completely silent. Every human officer on duty turned to look at Minji, waiting for her response. In that moment, she felt the weight of her entire species. Resting on her shoulders, Earth wasn't just their homeworld anymore. It was a symbol. It represented everything they had lost and everything they were fighting to reclaim. But more than that, it was home to 8 billion people who had never asked to be part of this war. Minji felt something cold and terrible settle in her chest. It was the same feeling she had experienced as a young officer during the border wars, when she had realized that sometimes the only way to stop a monster was to become something even more frightening. The Council had just crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. "All ships," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the fleet communication channels. "Target the ethereal flagship. I want it disabled, not destroyed. We're going to need prisoners for what comes next." She stepped closer to the communications station. "Lieutenant Hygen, open a channel to every Council world. Broad spectrum transmission. Override their emergency frequencies if you have to. Channel open, Admiral." Minji looked directly into the communication pickup. Knowing that her words were about to be broadcast to billions of beings across Council, space. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of 3 years of suffering, 3 years of planning, and 3 years of carefully controlled rage. "To the Galactic Council and all member worlds," she began. "You tried to erase humanity from history. You decided we were unworthy of existing in your civilized space. You cast us out like garbage and expected us to quietly disappear." She paused, letting the weight of those words sink in across the galaxy. "Instead, you just made us the authors of your new reality. The age of the Council is over. The age of the Coalition has begun. And if you think pointing planet killer weapons at innocent civilians will save you from the consequences of your choices, you're about to learn just how badly you've underestimated what humans are capable of when you threaten our families." The transmission cut, leaving the bridge in tense silence. Around them, the Coalition fleet moved with deadly precision. Surrounding the Council forces like a pack of wolves closing in on wounded prey, the Council had wanted to make an example of humanity. Instead, humanity was about to make an example of them. The grand chamber that had once housed the Galactic Council looked completely different now. Gone were the floating crystal platforms and ethereal light displays that had made the space feel like some kind of mystical temple. In their place stood rows of practical workstations, holographic tactical displays, and communication arrays that hummed with constant activity. The transformation was deliberate. This wasn't meant to be a place of ceremony anymore. This was a working government. President Jinho stood at a simple wooden podium in the center of it all, a piece of furniture that had been crafted from earth oak and transported across half the galaxy specifically for this moment. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone watching, where the Council had ruled from floating platforms that literally elevated them above everyone else. The leader of the Terran Commonwealth stood on solid ground, speaking from behind furniture that any citizen could have built in their garage. The audience stretching out before him presented something that would have been impossible to imagine just 5 years earlier. Delegates from over 300 worlds sat in orderly rows. But these weren't the formal diplomatic representatives that the Council had preferred. These were merchants, farmers, factory workers, teachers, soldiers, and engineers. People who had built their civilizations with their own hands and weren't interested in pretty speeches from beings who had never worked a day in their lives. "Citizens of the Commonwealth," Jinho began, his voice carrying clearly through the chambers. "Acoustics. Today marks not just the anniversary of our founding, but the moment when we can officially say that the dream of true galactic democracy has become reality." Behind him, the wall displayed something that still took his breath away every time he saw it. Hundreds of flags representing different worlds and species hung in carefully arranged rows. The familiar blue and white of Earth was there, but it was just one among many. The silver and gold of the Zeltharian war clans hung next. To the geometric patterns of the AI collectives, the trading banners of the former Thurian merchants shared space with the simple clothed flags of agricultural worlds that had never been important enough for the Council to notice. The Terran Commonwealth welcomes all beings seeking freedom from oppression, Jinho announced, knowing that his words were being broadcast to billions of viewers across the galaxy. We don't offer membership in an exclusive club. We don't require you to abandon your traditions or conform to someone else's idea of civilization. We offer something much simpler and much more valuable, true partnership. In the back of the chamber, Dr. So-young watched the proceedings with the satisfaction of someone whose wildest theories had not only been proven correct but exceeded in every possible way. Next to her stood one of the AI Collective's mobile platforms. Its optical sensors focused on the sea of delegates before them. The transformation had been remarkable to witness. What had started as a desperate alliance of exiles had grown into something unprecedented in galactic history. Commonwealth didn't just control territory, it offered hope. Word had spread across the galaxy that there was finally an alternative to the Council's rigid hierarchy and bureaucratic nightmare. The results spoke for themselves. Entire star systems had declared independence from Council authority, knowing that Commonwealth fleets would protect them from retaliation. Trade routes that had been controlled by Council monopolies for centuries were now open to independent merchants. Worlds that had been stripped of their resources by core world corporations were finally getting fair prices for their exports. You know what the best part is? So-young murmured to the AI beside her, keeping her voice low enough not to disturb the speech. Enlighten me, Dr. So-young, the synthetic voice replied. They're not fighting us anymore. Look around this chamber. Half these delegates used to be Council citizens. They didn't join us because we conquered them or threatened them. They joined us because we offered them something better. She gestured toward the crowd of representatives. Build an empire where everyone actually has a voice in how things are run. Where merit matters more than which species you happen to be born as, and people will want to be part of it. It's not rocket science. The AI's optical sensors flickered. In what So-young had learned was their equivalent of amusement. According to my calculations, at current defection rates, the Galactic Council will cease to exist as a governing body within 18 months. Their remaining member worlds simply won't have the resources to maintain central authority. 18 months? So-young raised an eyebrow. That seems optimistic. I was thinking 12. On the podium, Jinho was reaching the climax of his speech. His voice grew stronger as he addressed not just the audience in the chamber, but the countless beings watching across the galaxy. To the former council leadership, wherever you might be hiding, he said, and the chamber fell completely silent. To those who cast humanity out of civilized space and told us we were unworthy of your society, I have a message for you. He paused, letting the weight of the moment build. Thank you. The simple words hit the chamber like a physical force. Several delegates actually gasped. You freed us from the burden of asking permission to be great, Jinho continued. You forced us to find our own path, to build something better than what you offered. You taught us that we didn't need your approval to create a civilization worth being proud of. His expression shifted into something that was part smile, part challenge. And to everyone else watching this broadcast, everyone still trapped in systems that don't value your contributions or respect your rights, I want you to know that you have options now. The Commonwealth is growing every day, and there's room for anyone willing to work toward a better future. Jinho stepped back from the podium and spread his arms wide, encompassing the entire chamber. Welcome to the future, everyone. I have a feeling it's going to be one hell of a ride. The chamber erupted in applause that seemed to go on forever. Representatives from 100 different species rose to their feet, cheering in dozens of languages that the translation system struggled to keep up with. The sound was overwhelming, but it wasn't the polite, measured applause of diplomatic ceremonies. This was the sound of people who genuinely believed they were witnessing history being made. In the space of just 5 years, humanity had gone from exiled refugees scraping by in the galactic wilderness to the founders of the most successful multi-species democracy in known history. The Commonwealth controlled more territory than the Council ever had, commanded more resources, and most importantly, had the voluntary support of its citizens rather than ruling through fear and bureaucracy. And as So-young watched the celebration around her, she couldn't help but smile. They were just getting started.